You got me? All right. That sounds good there. Right there. Right there. We have Green Valley envelopes this morning, so if you got an extra dollar or two to throw in the envelopes throughout the year, that actually helps quite a bit. Just another way for us to help or get our kids educated in the Lord. I know my kids have lifelong friends from Green Valley that they still count on today. So good to see everybody in and out and about, and we got a beautiful day ahead of us, looks like, and glad everybody's here. I probably won't finish up this week. But I will finish up next week. So the week after, we're going to talk a little bit about stuff this morning, but the week after, we're going to throw Keith back in the mix on marriage. So see what lies he's got to tell about that, huh? Anyhow, it's good to have everybody with us this morning, and we're going to be in 1 Corinthians chapter 6. We're going to try to get from verse 12 through 17. We're talking about sexual immorality this morning and how it relates to how the world thinks and what the church thinks and what God says and what the world says. And I'll try to do it without my readers this morning, but I've got them backed up just in case. I cannot get my brain to hook up in the morning whether I can see or not, so it starts to be difficult. But the closer I get to retirement, it doesn't matter no more, does it? I just wear my readers all the time, and if I can't see, I can't see. So the last statement I made last week, I think would be a good statement to start with this week is the lifestyle of the wicked is no longer acceptable for those whom upon God has begun his spiritual work. Okay, so the church. Lifestyle of the wicked has nothing to do with, or shouldn't have anything to do with the church. And so, as we talk about uh, 12 through 17, I'm going to go ahead and read it real quick, and then everything is permissible for me, but not everything is beneficial. Everything is permissible for me, but I will not be mastered by anything. Food is for the stomach, and the stomach for food, but God will destroy them both. The body is not meant for sexual immorality, but for the Lord, and the Lord for the body. By his power, God raised the Lord from the dead, and he will raise us also. Do you not know that your bodies are members of Christ himself? Shall I then take the members of Christ and unite them with a prostitute? Never. Do you not know that he who unites himself with a prostitute is one with her in body? For it is said, the two will become one flesh. But he who unites himself with the Lord is one with him in spirit. So it's easy to lose focus as we go through this study, and I want us to understand from the onset that Paul is dealing with an issue in Corinth regarding sexual sin, and prostitution was a thing that they counted necessary. But we'll get into that here in just a little bit. I want to. The Apostle Paul is going into this instruction concerning sexual immorality, as he gets ready for the teaching or the study or the questions regarding marriage. And so we need to remember that our notions and our beliefs on sexual immorality, any beliefs about our bodies regarding these things, sexual morality, immorality, marriage, defining this and that, is going to have a huge effect on how we view, how we look at, and how we understand marriage. And so, and also will have a big impact on our marriage. So if we think that sexual immorality, adultery, idolatry, or homosexuality are acceptable in the sight of God, which at some point in time that was the case in Corinth, then marriage is going to be negatively impacted. And we see that in our society today. Attitudes about immorality change everything about how we approach our expectations. Our expectations of marriage, our expectations of commitment, our expectations of the brotherhood, our expectations of our neighbors. How we feel about that change our approach and our commitment. And as Keith gets into marriage, and Paul's getting ready to do that in chapter 7, but he's getting a little ahead of himself here. A good marriage requires both the husband and wife to work together as they fight against sexual immorality. So Paul recognizes here that it should be enough just to tell Christians. Okay? That's not the case, but it should be enough just to tell Christians that sexual immorality is condemned by God. And that should be the end of it. But he has to deal with arguments from the Christians at Corinth as they justify their behavior. Okay? And that's what he's talking about as he goes through the next few verses, dealing with the Corinthian brethren, justifying their behavior based on cultural norms, things that are acceptable in society, their definition of the things we talked about last week. All of these things factor into what's going on in the church and going on with the things that Paul has to deal with. And I can tell you that it's the same thing that the elders and the congregation has to deal with today. The world is not any different. It's the same, only different. I don't know. Humankind is humankind, and our attitude towards different aspects of life, based on our understanding of God and things that are going on in the church, all of these things have an effect on how we live our lives. And so Paul begins by quoting what the Corinthians were saying about justifying their sexually immoral behavior. So this is their excuses. Their first declaration is all things are lawful. So, if all things are lawful, and this is their justification, if all things are lawful, I can do whatever I want with my body. And we hear that some today. Say, it's my body. I have rights over my body. I can do as I please with my body. Okay, and like I said, the same arguments are used today for the sexual immorality and abortion and things that the arguments that are made today are the same arguments that were made then. The same justifications that are made now are the same justifications that were made then. And these are the things Paul is dealing with. And so we can read this into our society somewhat based on the behaviors of our society now as they mirror the behaviors of society that Paul was living in. And so Paul's response is, well, actually, he's going to use 4 arguments in his response to these declarations of mine. First, just because, and we talked a little bit about this last week, and we talked about what I try to instill in my children, but they're men now, so what I had tried at one point to instill in my boys, just because you may think that something is lawful does not mean that it's helpful, okay? And we're going to use that word helpful a little bit this morning, but just because something is lawful does not mean it's helpful. And there's lots of examples of what we can do for that, but and we can destroy ourselves with this kind of argument, this kind of thinking. I have rights and freedoms to do whatever I want with my body, okay? And that's a misnomer. The problem is, things that you're doing to yourself are not helpful, okay? Remember, we're trying to focus on what is helpful, not because it's lawful, but is it helpful, okay? It's childish. The thing that comes to my mind, it's not fair. It's mine. I ought to be able to do with it what I want. It's not fair, okay? If you got a little child that believes he can do what he or she wants, and he runs into the street, you can do what you want. You can do what you like. But is that helpful? Okay? Is that dangerous? Is that putting yourself in a position of danger or even helplessness? And that's what we're talking about this morning. You can do what you want, but is it helpful? Just because you think you have a right to do something doesn't mean you should do it. And because it's not good spiritually or physically helpful. Okay? If it's not spiritually or physically helpful, okay. And we're going to make that a point. Is it helpful? Now, Paul responds to this that saying he will not be dominated by anything. Okay? He will not be controlled by anything. Something may be lawful for you to do, but you cannot become mastered by it. Okay? Think about that. Okay? Maybe lawful, in our country and in our state and even in our county. It didn't used to be so in our town, but in our county, it's not illegal for a person of age to buy alcohol, to consume alcohol. Okay? It's not illegal. But is it helpful? Okay?
Abortion was the same way. It was legal for 50 years.
Absolutely. But was it helpful? Okay? And that's, the kind of argument that Paul is dealing with. It's not against the law, and seeing how it's not unlawful, I should be able to do what I want. Okay? So, many things in life may not be inherently sinful, but if they are addicting, and there's all sorts of addictions out there, and there's all sorts of help for any kind of addiction. There's, as far as alcohol or drugs or gambling or sexual addiction or any number of things, okay? Generally, the first step is to admit that you have a problem, okay? And that's what Paul is explaining to the Corinthian brethren, because their society says that they don't have a problem, okay? And I don't have the name of this author, but there was one Roman author in the time of Corinth here. The attitude towards sexual immorality at this time was, provided you keep away from married women, virgins, young innocents, and children of respectable families, love anyone as you wish. Okay? That sounds bizarre. But another writer, Cicero, wrote, if there's anyone who thinks that young men ought not to visit prostitutes, he is certainly narrow-minded and completely out of step with our present liberal thinking. In fact, he has nothing in common with the customs and behavior of this and previous generations, who were quite broad-minded on this particular subject. Okay? And so, as bizarre as that may sound, that's the culture in which Paul is preaching. You know, he's immersed in this culture. And so we shouldn't be dominated or possessed or brought under the power of anything. Your freedom, and I think this is an excellent quote by Paul, your freedom must not, or not by Paul, but in amongst what was going on here, your freedom must not be used to enslave yourself to the flesh. Okay? You shouldn't use your freedom to enslave yourself. Okay? It just makes sense. You shouldn't use your freedom to be able to buy alcohol to allow that alcohol to enslave you to that addiction. Okay? So, with sexual immorality, it's very true. Sexual immorality is very addictive and difficult to break. Even if you could successfully argue that sexual immorality was lawful, it still must not be done because it's going to master you and enslave you and take over your freedom. And so, you know, pornography does the same thing. Sexual desires are enslaving. We should not be surprised that God calls us to remain pure until marriage, because sexual desire is very powerful. God says that it's a must that we control that desire. Okay? And there's the whole rabbit hole of argument that God wouldn't have given me that desire if he didn't expect me to use it. Okay? The other half of that coin is Satan can use it too. Okay? And
Scientifically speaking, it's the same thing as a drug addiction.
absolutely. Absolutely. As far as the dopamine in the brain and all the things that occur within your system, it can be equated to drug addiction. Okay? Turns on the same pleasure centers in the brain. Okay? And so God says that we must control that. And he says it can be controlled. Okay? So we can't just say, I just can't help myself. Okay? That's not a good argument. I just can't help myself. We're not to be dominated by anything. Okay? We're not to be controlled by anything. We're to use our freedom to praise God. Okay? We're to use our body to praise God. And its purity to, you know, and we'll get into this in a little, maybe next week, but this week, but, you know, it's the temple of the Holy Spirit. And we get away from that because it's mine, you know. But we're going to talk about this. So his third response, it's in verse 13, where Paul says, the body is not meant for sexual immorality, but for the Lord. So they were saying that the food is meant for the stomach and the stomach meant for food. Therefore, the body is meant for sexual behavior. And it's a natural thing. It's natural and right to give in to those desires. Okay, that's the argument. And we'll use whatever argument's necessary to do what we want to do, to justify the things, our behaviors, justify our addictions, to justify. And so the argument is that if you have these desires, it must be right. It must be acceptable because you desire to do certain things, just like having the desire to eat, and that's what they correlate it with. You know, my body says I have to eat. Okay, and so if I don't cave into that desire, I'll starve. Okay, so my body says, you know, I have this desire for this sexual immorality. So if I don't cave to that desire, then I'm, denying my body what it needs. Okay? And so, but just because you have a desire doesn't mean it's a right desire. Okay? And I don't know if any of you have ever had any dealings with alcoholics or drug addicts. They have a desire, and that desire will overwhelm anything else in their path to get to that particular thing. Okay, I told this story before, but I had a friend in college that he was older, but he had been addicted to heroin. Okay, and he had not taken heroin for years, before I met him, and so, but he still considered himself an addict. And I said, "How do you know?" I said, "How do you know you're a heroin addict?" And he said, "When you said the word heroin, my mouth watered." Okay? So that addiction was so deep in his psyche that he could, like if you think about your favorite food and your mouth waters, you think about your persona changes when you think about any particular thing. But his thing was his mouth would water just saying the word. And I don't have anything to correlate that with. I don't have that. But it struck me as how difficult that would be to give up. How difficult that would be to put aside. And he didn't do it because of religious reasons or anything like that. He just...
That's something you fight every day too. It's not like you quit it.
Right, you don't quit. You fight it every day. He had woken up 3 days later, 3 days went away, that he didn't know where they went. And he woke up hitchhiking in Denver, Colorado, which is why I called him Colorado. I'm not sure what his real name was, but I called him Colorado. Hitchhiking with a Mooney. I don't know, you guys will know what a Mooney is. On a highway in Denver, Colorado. Had no idea how he got there, who this person was. 3 days later, he just wakes up, and this is his life now. And he decided then that was probably not a good idea to continue at that particular pace. And so, and that's the reason he had put that away. But just that desire is so.
Says it's better that you stay single than burn with passion or something like that.
Right, and that's a whole nother level of what we're talking about. And so, desire doesn't mean it's lawful or approved desire from God. Okay, and that's what we need to continue to focus on. Is it helpful, and is it approved by God? Okay, and because we are God's. Okay, if you're driving, okay, and we're talking about desire right now, and this one kind of hit home, but if you're driving and you have the desire to run someone off the road, who just cut you off or whatever, causing you some kind of difficulties on the road, somebody cut you off, and you have that desire to run them off the road, that doesn't mean you have the desire. It popped up and there it is. What you do with that desire is you calculate, is it helpful? It may help everybody else on the road, okay, so we can justify that. Is it lawful? Absolutely not. Is it something that God would approve? Absolutely not. And so you just kind of check off those marks, and it's easy to see that that's not something that we should cave to that particular desire. And so God is in charge of your body. The body was meant for the Lord. Your body is not created and given to you by God for you to live fulfilling your own sexual and moral desires. Okay? The Lord is Lord over your body. Just because your body has an appetite or desire does not mean you have the right to fulfill that desire however you might please. Okay? The body is God's. And so, the rest of what Paul says in 13 is, the body is for the Lord and the Lord is for the body. There are at least two things we need to take away from the Lord is for the body. God is commanding you, regarding your body and your sexual immorality, the things he's putting in place, okay, are for your good, okay? God's not trying to punish you, keeping you away from sexual immorality. God's not trying to deny you, okay? God is for you, okay? God is for your body. And he's trying to, with these instructions, save you from harm, okay? He's not being oppressive. He's commanding what is in your best interest, okay? He is for you. Let's not forget that. He is for you, okay? Some think that sexual desires come from the source of evil, okay? And that sexual relations are sinful. God made your body. God is for your body. He created your body. He created those sexual desires. So they should not be described as inherently evil, okay? Now, can we react in a way that is evil? Absolutely, okay? Men and women should not feel bad, and there's this train of school of thought that says it's evil and you should stay away from it. Your body was not made for immorality, but for the Lord. So we fulfill our desires in the way God instructed. God made your desires. God made your body, and He is for you. Okay? There's a way to fulfill the desire that God has given you. So the ultimate problem with sexual immorality, and Paul's, we're hearing Paul's fourth argument, is your bodies are members of Christ. Okay? So as we remember that, you are joined with Christ as His disciple. Your body belongs to Christ. Therefore, sexual immorality is unthinkable. How can you take your body, which you have given to the Lord, and join that body to a prostitute? And that's the question Paul is asking this community. How can you take your body, which is now Christ's, and join Christ to a prostitute? It just doesn't seem, sensible. So, how can you give your body to sexual immorality when you were washed, you were made holy, you were justified, you were set apart for service to the Lord? Now, the Corinthians were asking, what's the big deal? Who cares? Who cares if we're sexually immoral? Who cares if we join with a prostitute? That's the teenager's argument. Everybody's doing it. What's the big deal? Everybody's doing it. And Paul is explaining what the big deal is. Okay? And so, joining yourself with a prostitute and those kind of things will take us down a rabbit hole. But the big picture is, and what Paul is trying to say is, this has not always been true in the history of mankind in the Scriptures, as far as this sexual immorality and being joined with the prostitute, and the two become one, and all of those things. Nowhere in the Scriptures does it teach that when you commit adultery, you're no longer married to your spouse. You become married to the person you committed adultery with. And the thing is, you are joined to Christ. Your body belongs to Him. Sex is just not just sex. It's an emotional joining of body and spirit to another person. So the sexual immorality separates you from God, okay? Separates you from Christ. And so you're either joined to another person or you're joined to the Lord in purity. You can't be both. And Paul is describing that problem, the spiritual problem versus the physical problem, as he deals with this in Corinth. So Paul says, flee sexual immorality because it's not helpful. It'll master you and you'll become enslaved to it. Your body is made for serving the Lord, and you're not joined to Christ when you're joined in sexual immorality. Okay? You're separated. We're wrecking ourselves allowing sexual immorality into our lives. You're wrecking your soul, you're wrecking your body, you're wrecking your marriage. There's a reason why sexual immorality is a God-given reason for marriage and to divorce. You've wrecked your marriage. Pornography destroys marriages. It's just living in a fantasy, not in a reality. It's easy to understand that it's something that's trying to take place of a relationship. It's a fantasy relationship versus a physical, deep, intellectual, common relationship. And the more we have the internet, I'm just going to say the internet and everything that goes with it, it becomes more and more of a problem. People isolate themselves and then live in a fantasy world that doesn't exist, and feel like they can thrive there when they're just condemning themselves. And so we can talk about the studies and all that as far as just couples that live together without getting married or live together before marriage, okay? And these numbers are skewed because now it's more beneficial, as far as the government is concerned, for a man and woman to live together without getting married, especially if they have children, because the social help for the mother and child it's a lot. There's a lot of money involved, and so it doesn't make financial sense. It's just so bizarre. But anyway, it always comes back to the money. It doesn't make financial sense for them to get married. Okay, so the numbers that are in this particular lesson, those that were living together before they got married, the divorce rate is higher than the national average divorce rate of those that just got married. But it doesn't take into account those that live together but never did get married and are no longer together, or those kinds of situations. So those numbers are skewed. But there's a problem with the study. The divorce rate among those who cohabitate is not lower, but divorce in general is on a rise. So not only are you living against God's law, you're putting your future marriage in jeopardy. And so it just kind of keeps rolling. It just keeps snowballing as far as those particular instances go. So we need to focus on the wisdom of God. Okay? We need to focus on the fact that these are not just innocent, insignificant sin. Okay? We understand that sin is sin. Sin separates us from God. But the ramifications of a particular sin may be different than the ramifications of another sin as far as your life and your family and the world. Okay? And so Sins destroy this. They destroy marriages, children, homes. They destroy your soul. They destroy you. So don't be deceived. You're not enslaved to something that you are unable to will yourself into stopping. Okay? And it is an enslavement. You've traded your freedom for this enslavement. So once your heart is entangled and captured in this immorality, it's hard to get out of. You're ensnared at that point. You can't even will yourself into stopping at some point. And so you don't have control any longer. You're no longer joined to the Lord when you're joined in this sexual immorality. And you're hurting yourself, okay? You're separating yourself. You're denying yourself God's freedom. You're denying yourself a relationship with God. You're damaging your relationships with others, and you're separating yourself from Christ. Those aren't insignificant things. Okay, those are eternity things. Okay, those are things that will separate you from God. So next week we're going to talk about how Paul instructs them to run away from that particular scenario. We're going to talk about how to flee sexual immorality, how to set it aside, how to run from, how to put borders up, how to isolate, from that particular sin. And so, how to stay pure, how to stay united with Christ, how to have a mindset that focuses on not necessarily what's lawful, but what's helpful. Instruction on how to live a pure life coming out of that situation. And so the bodily connection that we talked about being with Christ is we are Christ's body, and we separate ourselves from our own desire, or with our own desires. That has to be at the forefront of our thinking, because it's easy to they talk about putting stuff in a box. You take this particular thing, you put it in a box, okay, and that box is separate from everything else, and that's an easy way to ease your conscience. Okay, you just put it in the box. Okay, so it doesn't exist until I want to open that box, and then I'll just put it back in the box, and it'll be easy again. Okay. We need to get rid of the box. Okay, that's the problem. The sin that we know, that we recognize in our life, that we put in the box, that's insignificant, doesn't hurt anybody. It's only related to me. It's my thing. It's my shortcoming. It's my failure. I'll put it in the box. Nobody else needs to know about that. I'll only get it out every once in a while, and no harm, no foul. Okay? The thinking that I am mine, okay? I am this autonomous thing that is separate from everybody else. I'm not connected to anybody else at this moment. We're in the same building, and that's about as close to being connected as we are, okay? is a lie. Okay? When we put on Christ, when we were buried in baptism, and we put on Christ, when we are in Christ, we are connected to Christ. And me being connected to Christ connects me with the congregation. Okay? Connects me with God's children. Okay? Connects me with God. I'm not autonomous. I'm the farthest thing from autonomous. Okay? I'm part of a body. And so how I behave, whether it's in a box or not, affects the body. Okay? That little yeast affects the whole lump. We're a lump. Okay? We can't be separated from one another. And so it's important to put our selfish person aside and consider what's helpful, not only for me, but what's helpful for us as we go forward. So next week we're going to be in chapter 6, 18 to the end, so 18, 19, and 20, around there. And then Keith's going to teach us all he knows about marriage. So he's got a couple weeks to study up and learn everything he can from Debbie so he can tell us what he knows. So thank you for your time, and we'll see you next week. And don't forget to meet our visitors.